Hello and welcome to the next of our recaps. This is a recap of our lecture on agency and transactional theory. So first thing we looked at was agency theory. Remember that agents, usually in the case of corporate governance, we're talking about management. So management act for the shareholders. So the agents, who are the management, act for the principal, who are the shareholders, to manage the company. Because the shareholders own the company, the managers come in and manage it for them. So what does this actually mean? Well, it means that the interests of each are different. Remember, the shareholders will want long-term stability of the organisation, whereas the managers will want short-term bonuses and payments now. So we need to try and get goal congruence between these two. We need to make sure that they both want the same thing. So some of the key terms that we need to be aware of here is, first of all, that agency relationship, and that's the relationship between the principal and the agent, so the shareholders and the management. Agency costs, remember, are costs that are borne by the principal, and that's of monitoring the agent. So agency costs will be borne by the principal. A fiduciary relationship, remember, exists because the agent is responsible to the principal. So that simply means that the agent is responsible to the principal. And remember, there will be differing objectives, and those differing objectives will be between the agent and the principal. So with this agency relationship, we can see various types within the organisation. First of all, the main one that we're concerned with is between the directors and the shareholders. The directors manage the company, the shareholders own it, and we know that their interests are not the same. We need to try to bring them together. The auditors and the shareholders also have an agency relationship. The auditor's report, remember, is to the shareholders, so they're acting as agents of the shareholders also. So some of the costs that will be involved here, agency costs, will be monitoring the agents costing the principal money. So monitoring the agents is going to cost the principals money, and they need to report, so that means there's going to be a reporting cost. So, for example, they need to pay the auditors to actually report to them. So that's going to be a reporting cost. There'll be incentive costs. We need to incentivise management to act on behalf of the shareholders. That will be a cost. And there'll be the cost of management risk taking as well. Also, don't forget directors' extras, cars, etc. that are paid for through the business. Those will be agency costs. So how do we resolve this agency problem? Well, some of the actions we could take were to have regular meetings, so between the shareholders and the management, regular shareholder votes at those meetings. Well, management exactly will have to take some consequence for what they do. So if management, for example, are trying to do something that the shareholders didn't want them to do, well then the shareholders could accept a takeover, and that might mean that management were no longer in charge. Ultimately, the shareholders could sell their shares if they weren't happy with how the business was being run. So when it comes to corporate governance, well, some of the key things between shareholders and the management are that corporate governance will regulate the relationship between the two, and we'll look at that in detail in some of the next lectures. It creates accountability between the management and the shareholders, and it gives the directors key responsibilities that they must uphold. So we looked at the details of this in illustration 1. Remember, transactional cost theory was an alternative to agency theory, and it focused on transaction costs. So external transaction costs such as finding suppliers, purchases, monitoring costs, those sorts of things, well, those could be reduced by organising the business, by introducing corporate governance. So bring in corporate governance, reduce those transaction costs, and if they're too high, you can internalise the costs to reduce them. So we also mentioned at this point those stakeholders. Remember, they need to be considered whenever we're thinking about the agency problem, because there still will be some accountability to stakeholders from the company. So stakeholders should be considered, and agency is part of that. So that was our lecture on agency theory and transactional theory.